formal engagement, you have these random bayonettings of people. And one Fraser, John Fraser, an officer in Lovat's, he exemplifies this messy nature of rebellions and what the lack of strategy, I think, about how to deal with them even when you're winning. He is wounded in the battle and then survives the bayonettings, although his commanding officer, Charles Fraser of Inverness, doesn't. He then must think, okay, that's it. A cart comes up and he's thrown into it, and other wounded are thrown into it, and they're taken away. But instead of going to a place of safety, they're going to a place of execution. And they're lined up, and muskets are shot at them from a distance of about 6 to 10 feet. And that does indeed kill more of them, but still John Fraser survives. And having failed then, they then turn the muskets round and they kind of club to death those that the shot hasn't killed, and still he survives. You're almost in the realms of Monty Python now, but he still survives. He's got a smashed cheekbone, and he's lost an eye, and he lives to tell the tale. And I think that, as I say, he exemplifies this haphazard nature of how to put down a rebellion. But one strategy Cumberland did have, of course, was to capture the rebel leaders. And for that, he needed some intelligence on where to get them from. So you can take prisoners. You don't actually have to kill everyone, or attempt to. And some were put in the Gaelic High Church, Fraser's among them, and others. And some were put into 2 prison ships, the Liberty and Property and the Jean, that were down in the Firth. And months go past, and come the day when they want to gather evidence for the trial of Lord Lovat, one of the an unredeemed Highlander. An officer is rowed out, and the hold is opened. And in his own words, he says, "What a sight beheld my nose and eyes, the wounded festering in their gore and blood, the dead quite covered over with piss and dirt, and the living standing to the middle, in the middle of it." These people may not be very useful as witnesses, because those who are living are probably traumatised, and you've probably also got some monoglot Gaelic speakers here. And he says they are there, they're going to be taken out to trial to intimidate the people more, if possible, to the Lord Lovat's prejudice. Well, if that doesn't work, the people, that in that word more, they've already been intimidating them, because in the days after Culloden, Cumberland sent Colonel Mordaunt with volunteers into Fraser country to try and encourage the people to yield what they knew about him, and also the Bonnie Prince. Their specific orders were to investigate the rumour that Lovat and the young pretender lay at the Castle Downey, in the night before Culloden. They actually, naturally, I think, got there and went completely out of control and torched Downey and despoiled it. They seized 1,000 bottles of wine from Lovat's cellar, 300 bowls of oatmeal, we're going to have a good party after this, a library to the value of £400, portraits, bedding, anything that can be traded or used. They then also turned on the ordinary dwellings, and those were asset stripped as well. Anything of use, cattle, poultry, that's all taken away. And they then, all this was very cheerfully undertaken and performed, one of them said, And back they went with their hideous harvest, and the soldiers needed to make a bit of money, so they set out market stalls, and people would come and barter for what they had lost, if they could. Some of the officers bought Lovat's claret, and no doubt, I think they paid 2 shillings a bottle for Madeira and 1 shilling and 8p for his claret. And you would drink some and you would send the rest home, where you could go and reminisce about this barbaric medieval time and place, far away, so different from the early Enlightenment British state. But none of this is going to yield Lovat or the young pretender. They're away. but he must get some sort of intelligence and expands his search west out of Fraser country. And the orders then are to pursue and hunt these vermin in their lurking hills. And I like the word lurking, because it almost animates the hills. You know, the hills are ready to ambush the soldiers as they come in. And I like that. But as much as I like that, I hate the word vermin. Because if you can drive off cattle and use them, and if you can make use of the poultry, etc., vermin don't have a use. They are there to be eradicated. And I think that what's happening is Cumberland's irritation and frustration. You remember, he thought he'd be away by now, a few weeks after the rebellion. And again, we're into this it's just an expression of frustration and irritation, and he's trying to think what to do next. Also, of course, the whole vermin thing. I mean, I know it's gratuitous, but it does call to mind those obscene Nazi propaganda videos where churning plagues of rats are playing on a screen while the voiceover tells the people what their fellow German Jews, what effect they've had on the German nation. This is going to be pest control post-Culloden style. So out they go, and one of the king rats is Lovett the 45. He's one of the big pieces of vermin. And they pick him up between the 4th and 5th of June near Mora. Captain Ferguson winches him into the boat. He is sailed round to Fort William and then up to Fort Augustus. The soldiers are hanging out looking for him. He is by this time iconic. He's what they need. They need a leader. He symbolises the threat. They haven't got the young pretender. And Cumberland's words, they kind of express his relief and glee. He says, "I imagine the taking of Lord Lovett is a greater vexation and humiliation for the Highlanders than anything that could have happened. He is dignified with great titles and ranks high in command." So that is his symbolic image being created. And the soldiers remark that he's not up to much, really. He's an old man of 80 being carried in. And they're kind of, why were we so frightened of him? But he's both, of course. He's both the old man and he's the symbolic threat. He's taken from Fort William to Fort Augustus, and from there, from Fort Augustus up to Stratherick. And if Cumberland's words are sort of Lovett's obituary, in a way, then what Lovett then comes across is a vision of his own funeral, because all the Fraser kin in Stratherick turn out, and there is a Cernug. The women are keening, the men are tearing their beards, there's rending of things, and it must be a very weird feeling to be this kind of spectre at a preemptive funeral. They take Lovett on because they're not going to destroy him here. He does have a function to play in the theatre of treason and death, and he's taken to Edinburgh. He's there briefly, locked up in the castle. So is his son. I don't suppose they met. I don't know, but I don't suppose they did. And on to St Albans, where he meets Hogarth again, who makes these sketches for this wonderful portrait. Such a characterful portrait. And from there into London. Once he reaches London, the kind of traitor myth-making keeps going. The news sheets for the rest of the year are full of articles, and the gist of them, and this is whether we hooked the jaw, the government hooked the jaw of the great Leviathan, and they were not going to let go until they got him in. They're going to sort of lash this whale of wickedness to the side of the ship of state and start cutting it up. And that, together with Hogarth's cartoon, of which this is the oil painting, which was printed and sold out 12 times, so it was very popular. Eventually, Lovett's impeached. You know, if you think how many people does it take to try Lovett, the answer is hundreds. He's impeached before the whole body of peers in Westminster Hall, and they must all pronounce him guilty upon my honour. Again, a very odd feeling. He's known a lot of these people all his life, and they've known him as sparring partners or allies. It is a terrible thing, this whole internal contradiction of the traitor, the enemy within. Nevertheless, they have to kill him. And a week after he is sentenced, as they say, the axe calls for his head. So he's taken out from the tower, and he is driven to Tower Green in a cart, and there's a lot of racket. There's been so much build-up to this. And there he enters a little stone cell, which is lined in black cotton. There's no lights, no window, and I think the noise must have been quite muffled in there. And he kneels, says his prayers, has a little drink of burnt wine, and composes himself. Because he needs to, because the minute that door is opened, a wall of sound hits him. The nut-crunching crowd is there. Songs, dance, thousands of people. 50 people have died in the collapse of one of the terraces, put up to let people have a bird's eye, sort of bird's eye view straight across at the scaffold. And they made up songs, as through the city Lord Lovat did pass, the crowds in hundreds did follow, and cried, "You old fox, you are catch safe at last," while others hissed and some did hollow, "Don't you love it, Lord love it, Lord love it, don't you love it, Lord love it." And this is going round, that's sort of cantering round. And he then is carefully helped up onto the scaffold, and after a few words from Horace and Ovid, he is killed with one chop. And the Jacobite plunge for the thrones of the Stuarts thuds one step closer to extinction. But what I want to leave you is what's happening here, and I've been flagging it up pretty crudely all the way through, is that you're killing two things when you kill Lovat. You are killing the old man, a troublesome old man who's been too restless, too unreliable, although ambitious. And you're also killing the symbol of the traitor. And from Lucifer to the latest domestic atrocity on Westminster Bridge, as I said before, we don't like that internal contradiction when the traitor shows us. We would far rather he was out there. So the Highlands is out there. It is not part of us. And of course, therefore, they must chop the head of both the symbol and the man. And I think Arthur Forbes, who is the cousin of the great Duncan Forbes of Culloden, when he writes home that night, that's what he's alluding. He writes to Duncan, and he's alluding to that when he says, "Old Lord Lovat died today, and sure it's true that he lived like a fox, but he died like a lion. And, what's more, as a Highland chief should, that is, not in his bed."
I enjoyed that. And I have to say, it was really interesting hearing all the different perspectives that our speakers brought to the table. It created a really nice round picture. But what came through to me was this contrast of death as spectacle and the grinding eradication of somebody's dreams through taking away things that symbolize your culture, such as dress and language, destroying your livelihood. And when we think about people who are dealing with some of these issues in war-torn countries, it really reminds me of what is the ordinary person doing? The person who, like Alexander Smith, worked all his life, did everything he could, or thought he did everything he could right. Okay, made some mistakes, but the political world around you impacts everything that you do. And the men and women who make decisions on our behalf, they affect our lives. And it is just as true now as it is then. With that in mind, we have the opportunity to ask our speakers some questions. So, does anyone have anything? We've got one in the blue.
We've got one, her father. My daughter. Well done. Guy, what was the reaction in the Highlands to the execution of Lovat?
I think probably it was accepted. It was, I mean, to some people it will have been a completely mixed reaction, as you would get everywhere. To some it was a tragedy. Those people in Stratherick, this is the loss of, they probably get an intimation, and they certainly do quite quickly, because it's a year after his capture that he's killed. So they know that their society is breaking down and it's being eroded. As Christine said, there is economic collapse, there's social fragmentation, and so what he represented was the old order, and arguably that old order was already passing even by the time they arrested him. But a completely mixed reaction, I think, Dad. It was, you know.
Thank you, Dad.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Yes.
Could I ask, I enjoyed your book, by the way, it was a wonderful book.
Thank you.
Could I ask, is there any estimate of the amount of damage which was actually done after Culloden? I mean, do we have figures of people killed? I mean, we've got, you know, anecdotal stories of what they did to particular areas, but is there some sort of overall picture that we can say, you know, this is the impact that had over the country?
Well, I read one estimate. Well, first of all, there was the fact that I think 112 or 15 people were executed, and that a very rough estimate of the effects of the 45 was that it killed in the Highlands and Islands, particularly, about 3,500 people. Well, it either killed or removed that number of people. Yeah, that's throughout Scotland as a whole, probably, not just the Highlands and Islands. But in terms of economic effect, that in previous times, of course, there was a healthy tradition of cattle raiding and so on, and bills would be sent into the government to try and get restitution and money back from damage done. But after the 45, with an army of occupation, the devastation was so absolute throughout these areas that it was total ruin for a lot of people, particularly, interestingly or horrifyingly, in the Roman Catholic districts of the West Coast, where the wreckage and ruin was total, and it took a generation to get back onto any sort of reasonable economic footing.
I have to say there, you've got to remember the Scottish Episcopal
Indeed, it was indeed.
And coming from the West,
Yeah.
you've quoted Colin Campbell. Well, my theory is that James of the Glen was also hung as a consequence. He was at Culloden too,
Yeah.
and he was a chosen one to for the killing of.
Yes. Yeah.
So scapegoated.
Yeah.
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 Yes.
Just a question for anyone. Was there still hotbeds of rebellion happening after Culloden and after all these suppressive acts? When we did with the likes of Glengarry, with the MacDonnells, and even McGregor country, did this still occur, and for how long after?
I suppose through the following decade, if you look at one of the interesting sources on this is, first of all, official reaction as to what was happening and determination to obliterate all or hostility, and that results in a lot of pretty random, harsh acts, which of course stimulated more opposition and so forth. But I would say that a very interesting source on this is the reports of the army patrols, which gives you a hint of what was happening on the ground. And it really carries on for about a decade of hostility, acts of violence against the locals and so on. But of course, outright rebellion, there was one reason why the army of occupation was so harsh was that there was a real expectation, with lack of information, that the rebellion might well break out again. And it was thought that there were various pockets of resistance. For example, the clans were to meet at Riven in Badenoch after the Battle of Culloden. There was that as seen as a threat. There was several pieces of information about people meeting up on the west coast. Cameron Lochiel, Glengarry, all these people were suspected of fomenting rebellion again. And then also I noticed in the things I was looking in the record office, government trying to get better intelligence about what was happening and trying to sow informants into the west coast and getting them to tell on what was happening. And their accounts are kind of mixed, as you can imagine.
In response to your remarks about how it brought an end to the old order, is there a counter-argument that, given the romantic nature of Celtic culture, that in fact it was so grotesque that an 80-year-old had his head chopped off, that he was in any way became a symbolic martyr that galvanized the fact that we are still here 200 years later discussing? Is that argument hold any water?
Yes, I think it does. I mean, for example, there is now DNA testing going on at Wardlaw Mausoleum. You know, there was that whole, where are you going to bury Lovat? I mean, he must not be brought home as a martyr, was certainly one of the aims of the government. And so we've always thought he was buried in St. Peter ad Vincula, just sort of put under the earth there in the tower, in the church in the tower. But, maybe he was brought home because they thought he would become a martyr and a figure, even dead, around whom people might rally, which of course is linking into Hugh's point. And this whole lack of intelligence, this random haphazardness, where they didn't get maybe enough of the Jacobite leaders. They certainly had no idea what the Young Pretender would do. And we're going to find out quite soon, actually, whether Lovat did come back. If he did, they were very successful at suppressing it, because it's lain hidden for an awful long time, whether it's him or not. It's going to be announced this summer. They're doing forensic examination.
The only thing that strikes me about Kirsten's wee talk was the fact the joiner had 20 good years of business, yet he had no savings to tide him over. So it must indicate economically, in the business sense, it couldn't have been generating much wealth even in the good years. Secondly, I'm curious to know where all the timber went to, because most of the action was down south, and the trees would still be there. So I think it's the landed gentry decided not to sell anything. Perhaps they were away doing what they were doing. And thirdly, you mentioned that two of his workforce went off voluntarily to fight, whereas the talk we had yesterday suggested that a lot of them were coerced into fighting.
Yeah. I mean, that could have been the case. I mean, the fraseruk itself was very much a hotbed of Jacobism. So they could have, could have been a case that all their friends went off, or as you say, could have been coerced off. In terms of wood as well, what you have to also to take into account is a lot of wood was actually imported into Scotland as well. So it could have been the fact that he earlier on the diary mentions this Mr. Shand, who gets him wood from Holland and Danzig. It may have been the case that wood supply dried up with the rebellion because it could be blockades on the ports, etc. So therefore he had to go elsewhere to get the wood. And he does mention going to Gamray and to Lochaber to get the wood. So it could be on that case, on that basis, in that regard, as to why his usual sources of supply aren't there.
We have time for one more question. Yes.
Just a quick, how much would you see as the execution of Lovett as a justification for the whole portrayal of the Highlander as barbaric and savage in many of the years leading up to, prior to the Rising, and also as a justification, talking about economic base, and that the whole of modernity requiring a single language, requiring the Gael to be obliterated to enable the onward march of modernity and the imposition of a new model of economics that would define the modern nation state.
Well, yes, except, most of the Jacobite clans had been modernising. One of the things they took when they went into Fraser country was they destroyed what they called Lovett's fine salmon weirs. He had borrowed £300 from the Bank of Scotland with a minor laird about 10 years earlier. Couldn't do that today. Not without references, which of course he wouldn't get, But to start the salmon, and it was going quite well to catch and salt salmon and barrel them and send them south. So, and they had begun an accommodation and acculturation. They actually wanted, a lot of them were bidding for patronage, perks, positions from the government. The problem is the cake's too small in the Highlands. Argyll and his brother have got a very big slice of it. And up here, there's just, this is the kind of gist of Bruce Lenman's book, isn't it? The Jacobite clans of the Great Glen. That there just is too many people in the food chain, and so but they are modernising, and yes, Lovett does become iconic. He has been iconic, and he is made iconic, and he is useful, in that way, definitely.
Well, thank you very much to our speakers. I'd like to sum up with just 3 points that I found quite personal and touching from all of your talks. I'm the daughter of a carpenter. I did the math. Alexander Smith was 19 in the 1715, and he would have been 4950 through the 1745 and 46. And I know if my father had suddenly lost his work when he was 50, it would have been a terrible, terrible thing. Add that to somebody who potentially would have wanted to wear tartan, having a £15 fine, which is a lot of money, and then imprisonment for 6 months, and then transportation. That's a life sentence. The one thing that particularly struck me about the talk about Simon Fraser is this idea, and this phrase you used, the wounded festered in gore and blood in the prison ships, the dead covered in piss, and the living standing in the middle of it.
Yeah, that's a quotation.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to our speakers.